Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome back to the next video in From Medieval to Modern. Now, I've already introduced Gregorian Chant, and I could talk a lot more about it, but I wanted to go back and fill in a couple of things. But first, here's a quick overview of what we've learned about Gregorian Chant. First of all, it was monophonic, which means only one note at a time. It's modal, meaning it's based on modes, and I'll explain more about modes in a minute. It's sung a cappella, which means for the most part, Gregorian chant was sung with no instrumental accompaniment, no organs, no pianos, no orchestra. And it was sung in a free form, non-metered, no bar lines, no time signature. The music just seems to kind of float along. And it was written in such a way that it mirrored the rhythm of speech. You know, we don't speak in a monotone and go, one note at a time, but it kind of just flowed along. Also, the movement was stepwise. There weren't any big leaps in the melody. The range was limited from the lowest to the highest note. The range was limited, and it was sung in Latin. But let's talk more about the modes. Here's where the study of music history overlaps with the study of music theory, which is, of course, the study of how music works. Now, if you've been going through my Ears to Fingers series, learning how to play by ear, then you've already learned how to construct a scale on each one of the keys through a series of half steps and whole steps. Now later on we'll get to minor scales, but in exploring the modes more fully, I want to give you a brief introduction. See, modes are different. Modes were around long before the concept of major and minor keys were developed, and they can sound very different to your ears if all you've been listening to is music based on the keys with which we are familiar. So that's what makes Gregorian chant so interesting. It sounds almost otherworldly. Now the modes, they originated in ancient Greece and were named after different regions. And that's why, as you're going to discover, the modes have Greek names to this day. So what is a mode? Essentially, a mode is a scale. So you've already learned how to construct major scales. And each mode is a scale, and each mode has its own distinctive sound. Now, the early Christian church was heavily influenced by the Greeks, and so they adopted these modes as a basis for their music. I'm going to put in the description a link to a plainchant called Ubi Caritas. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the Latin correctly, but it's based upon a mode, so you can hear what it sounds like. Now, if you remember the introduction to Gregorian chant, I put a Gregorian chant up there, and that's based on a mode. And so this piece uses a mode, and it's not in a key, as we would call it. It's not in C major or G major. So the use of modes was developed, and by the 5th century, there were 4 modes that were adopted, and these are called the authentic modes. First of all, we had the Dorian Mode, the Phrygian Mode, the Lydian Mode, and the Mixolydian Mode. And then later on, other modes were added to be used in church music. Right around 1540, we learned about the Aeolian and the Ionian modes. And then there was a 7th mode, the Locrian Mode, which was added near the end of the 18th century. So we're not going to worry about that one too much. Now, you're going to learn, or I'm going to show you, how to find these modes on the keyboard using only the white keys. But it's important to understand that the difference in the modes is not based on what white key it starts on, but it's based on the intervals of the scale. And the reason that's important is that you can transpose the modes and play them starting on any note, as long as you keep the intervals between the notes the same. You remember how when we studied major scales, and I showed you how they were constructed using a series of half steps and whole steps? Well, the modes are the same way. So what I'm going to do now is show you a picture of each mode put out in notation on a treble clef. And then I will explain how each one is constructed, and I'll play them for you so that you can hear how they sound. So first of all, we're going to start with the Dorian Mode. Now, if you play the Dorian Mode on all white keys, you're going to start on D. So there's D, and all you're going to do is play all the white keys from one D to the next. And so this scale, which is the Dorian Mode, sounds like this. See, it's a little bit different. Maybe you've heard a minor scale, but it doesn't have this note. It's all the white keys. And so you'll notice, and I'll show you, I'm showing you here on the picture, you're going from D to E, that's a whole step, and then from E to F, we have a half step. And then from F to G is a whole step, G to A, whole step, A to B, whole step, but then here's the half step, and then it ends like that. So it's the Dorian Mode. So if you hear a song that goes like this, that's the Dorian Mode, you see. The Phrygian Mode, if we play it all on white keys, goes from E to E. And so we begin. Has a much different sound, doesn't it? Notice the half step comes right away from E to F. And then F to G, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. The Lydian Mode, if we play it all on the white keys, starts on F and it goes. Those of you who remember the old TV series, The Jetsons, I always call this one the George Jetson Mode. If you're too young to remember the Jetsons, you better ask your parents or your grandparents. And it's even like The Simpsons. So here we have F to G is a whole step, whole step, whole step, and then half step, whole step, half step. That's the Lydian Mode. Then we have the Mixolydian Mode. Starting on G, let's start on this G, and go to this G, and it would sound like this. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. That's actually a little excerpt of a piece I wrote when I was 13, 14 years old. I used the Mixolydian Mode. Now, the other modes that were added later on, this one starts on A and goes from A to A. It's called the Aeolian Mode, so it's an easy name to remember. And it's actually the same as what we would call a natural minor scale. But don't worry if you can't remember that right now. We'll get to that later. So it goes from A to A. Whoops, starting on this A, not the G. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. That's the Aeolian Mode. Almost sounds a little bit Native Americanish, doesn't it? And then finally, we have the Locrian Mode, which we're not going to worry about too much because it's kind of a starts with a half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step. I didn't even put up a diagram for this one because we're not going to worry about the Locrian Mode too much because it's not used a lot in church music. You're going to hear a lot of things in the Dorian Mode, the Lydian Mode, Aeolian, Mixolydian. And so there's your introduction into the modes. Now this is going to be a big help to you, especially later on when you get back into studying from ears to fingers, because a lot of popular songs use modes. In fact, I'll play you a snatch of a popular song that uses a mode. I'm not going to actually play the record because I'll get a copyright infringement. You hear that? It's not. That sounds a little strange. It's actually not in the key of E major, but it's in E Mixolydian. I could play it all on the white keys. So you're going to find a lot of popular tunes using modes. But Gregorian Chant, using modes, this is an important foundational thing for you to know because later on we're going to discover the greatest development in Western music. After the establishment of using modes, especially in the church music, this is going to be the greatest thing that ever happened in the development of Western music. That will be in our next video. So I look forward to sharing that with you. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so, and I'll talk to you later.